I never thought I'd be one of those women people whispered about. You know, the ones whose names come up when someone says, "Did you hear what happened to her?" It still doesn't feel real, honestly. Some mornings, I wake up and reach for the spot on my stomach where I used to rest my hand, like I'm expecting a tiny kick or a flutter. Then I remember, and it hits all over again. The silence that follows something you were supposed to hear forever. Asterisk. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. When I found out I was pregnant, it wasn't part of a grand plan. We weren't trying, not really. It just happened. I remember staring at that test in the bathroom, the cheap plastic kind that still felt too heavy in my hand. I sat on the edge of the tub, heart pounding, whispering, "Oh my God," over and over until it didn't sound like words anymore. My husband, Dan, was in the kitchen when I walked out. He looked up from his phone, half distracted, and when I told him, his first words weren't, "Congratulations," or "We're going to be parents." He just said, "Are you sure?" That was Dan in a nutshell, logical, detached, always needing proof. It wasn't that he was cruel at first. He just didn't know how to meet emotion with emotion. When I cried, he'd go quiet. When I laughed, he'd tell me to calm down. I used to think he was just reserved. Now I know he was measuring what he could control. At first, I told myself he just needed time to process. When I showed him the sonogram, that tiny smudge on the screen, he smiled, a small, cautious smile, and kissed my forehead. For a few weeks after that, it felt like maybe we'd turned a corner. He started coming to appointments, rubbing my back when the nausea hit. His mom even called me once to say, "He's excited, you know. He just doesn't show it like other people." But something shifted around the 4th month. I started bleeding a little. Spotting, they called it. And the doctor said it was probably fine, but I should rest. Dan didn't take it well. "You need to be careful," he kept saying. "You're probably overdoing it." When I told him I hadn't done anything out of the ordinary, he snapped, "You never listen." That was the first time I saw it, the edge behind his voice. I brushed it off, told myself he was just worried. But the more scared I got, the more he seemed to turn that fear against me. One night, I was curled up on the couch, cramping bad enough that I could barely stand. I told him I thought we should go to the hospital. He looked annoyed. "You said the doctor told you this happens sometimes. What's the point of rushing there for nothing?" I said, "Because it hurts, Dan." And he rolled his eyes like I was being dramatic. We didn't go that night. I bled through the next day. By the time he finally drove me to the A, I already knew. There's no sound in the world like the silence of an ultrasound, when you're waiting for a heartbeat that doesn't come. The nurse kept moving the probe, her brow tightening just slightly. Then she said she'd be right back, and I knew. I didn't cry at first. I just stared at the ceiling and tried to breathe through the hollow feeling in my chest. Dan sat in the corner, arms crossed, staring at the floor. When the doctor finally told us there was no heartbeat, I reached for his hand. He didn't take it. We drove home in silence. The streetlights blurred past, and I felt like I was floating somewhere outside my own body. When we got inside, I sat down on the floor in the hallway and finally started to sob. Loud, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deep and raw. Dan just stood there watching. Then he said, "You should have been more careful." That sentence, that's the one that carved something out of me I'll never get back. I couldn't even speak. My throat closed up. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to tell him that I'd done everything right. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the carpet while he kept talking. "You knew you weren't supposed to lift heavy stuff. You didn't rest enough. You never listen." He went to bed that night like nothing happened. I sat on the bathroom floor until morning. After that, it was like a fog moved into our house. He barely looked at me. When he did, it was with a kind of cold disgust. His mother started calling more, saying things like, "You should have let us help. And next time, you'll know better." Next time. Like the baby had just been a practice run. I stopped answering people's messages. My friends texted, "How are you holding up? Do you need anything?" But I didn't know how to reply without sounding insane. I couldn't explain the way grief sat in my bones. How it wasn't just sadness, but shame. Then Dan's sister came over one afternoon. Unannounced. She brought soup and a tight smile. "He's worried about you," she said, sitting across from me. "You've been distant." I told her I just needed time. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "He's hurting too. You know." That was the first time I realized his whole family saw me as the villain in this story. It only got worse from there. After Dan's sister left, the house felt colder. It wasn't just the quiet. It was how the air seemed to carry their judgment even when no one was there. Every phone call from his mother ended with a phrase that sounded like advice, but felt like accusation. "You should try to be strong for him. Men don't know how to process grief the way we do." I started apologizing for everything. If dinner was too salty, I said sorry. If I cried when a diaper commercial came on, I said sorry. If I sat in silence too long, he'd sigh, and I'd mumble another apology just to fill the space. I became small, careful with every word, every step. When he came home late, I pretended not to notice. When he slammed the door, I said I must have left it loose. I tried to believe that this was just grief, that eventually we'd find our way back to who we were before. But that version of us didn't exist anymore. Maybe it never did. The first time he raised his voice in front of his family, it was at his father's birthday dinner. I'd brought a store-bought cake because I hadn't been sleeping well enough to bake. His mother looked at the box and said, "You used to make such nice things when you cared." Everyone laughed, like it was a joke. Dan didn't. He looked at me with that same tired disgust. "She doesn't try anymore," he said. I laughed it off, tried to change the subject, but something in me cracked a little. That night in the car, I told him he'd embarrassed me. He said, "You embarrassed yourself." It wasn't one big explosion. It was 1,000 tiny ones, each one taking a piece of me. A slammed cupboard, a muttered insult, a long stare meant to make me shrink. Months passed like that. I stopped recognizing myself. I didn't look in mirrors much. Didn't want to see the tired eyes or the way my shoulders had learned to hunch automatically, like I was always bracing for something. Then came the night. Everything truly changed. His parents were over, along with his sister and her husband. They'd been drinking, laughing too loud, telling stories I couldn't follow. Someone mentioned babies, and his mother said softly, "Maybe next time, God willing." I froze. Dan's jaw tightened. The room went quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. He stood up too quickly. "Can we not talk about that?" he said sharply. I whispered, "It's okay." But that only made him angrier. "Don't tell me it's okay," he snapped. "You're the reason." He stopped himself, but the words hung there like smoke. Everyone stared at me. His mother's eyes flickered with pity that wasn't really pity. His sister whispered, "Dan, please." I wish I could say that I walked out right then. I wish I could tell you I was brave. But I just sat there, trying to hold myself together while my heart felt like it was collapsing. Later, when the others were leaving, his mother touched my arm and said, "You need to stop provoking him. He's been under a lot of stress." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, like she was giving me a secret recipe for keeping him from breaking. That night, the house felt different. The air was thick with all the things unsaid. I remember sitting on the couch, staring at the dark window when he came in from the kitchen. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. "You humiliated me," he said. Don't talk." The look in his eyes made me stop. It wasn't rage, exactly. It was something colder. Like he'd finally decided I wasn't a person anymore. Just the cause of all the things wrong in his world. I won't describe what happened after that. I remember the sound more than anything. A kind of dull thud, and the shocked silence that followed. I remember his mother's voice somewhere behind me, telling him to get control of himself. I remember hands on my arms, holding me still. And then I remember nothing. When I woke up, I was alone. The house was too quiet. My lip was split. My ribs hurt when I breathed. There was a blanket over me that smelled like his mother's perfume. On the table beside me was a glass of water and a note in his handwriting. "We both need to do better." That line broke me more than anything else. As if we shared the blame equally. As if my pain were a mutual project we'd failed at together. For days I didn't move much. I'd stare at the window, watching the light change, waiting for some part of me to feel like fighting back. It didn't come. Not right away. But one morning, when he left for work, I walked to the bathroom and caught my reflection. My face was swollen, one eye still ringed with shadow, but there was something new there too. A spark I hadn't seen in months. I packed a small bag. Just clothes, my phone charger, and a photo of the ultrasound, the one I'd hidden at the back of a drawer. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to move before I lost whatever strength had flickered to life. Her voice was calm, the same calm it always was. "Dan told me you left," she said. "You don't want to do that. People will talk. They'll think you're unstable." I didn't answer. "Come home," she said softly. "We can work this out as a family." I hung up. The bus came. I didn't get on. I stood there on the curb, shaking, the morning air cold against my skin. I thought about the baby, about all the moments that were supposed to come after. And I thought about how completely alone I was in the end. I went back. Not because I forgave him, but because I didn't know how to start over. He apologized, or something that sounded like it. He promised therapy, a fresh start, a future. I wanted to believe him, but every time I looked at him, I saw that night in his eyes. We lasted 3 more months. 3 months of pretending. 3 months of walking on eggshells, of swallowing words before they reached my lips. The night I finally left for good wasn't dramatic. He came home late again, smelled like whiskey, said something cruel I don't even remember. I waited until he fell asleep. Then I walked out with nothing but the bag I'd packed months ago. I stayed with a coworker for a while, then with a cousin in another city. I got a small apartment eventually, one with peeling paint and thin walls, but it was mine. I started to feel the quiet again. Not the dangerous quiet of our house, but the kind that comes before something new begins. Sometimes, though, I still hear him. Not his voice, exactly, but the echo of it. In the way I flinch when someone raises their hand too quickly, or the way I apologize when I haven't done anything wrong. People say time heals. Maybe it does, in pieces. But some things don't close cleanly. They scar unevenly, reminding you what you survived. A few months ago, I saw his mother at the grocery store. She looked older, smaller somehow. She glanced at me, then looked away. For a second, I thought she might come over. She didn't. That night, I took the ultrasound photo from my drawer and set it on the table. I talked to it for a while, not out loud, just in my head. Told it about the little apartment, the new job, the way the sunlight comes through the kitchen window in the morning. Then I said something. I hadn't been able to before. I'm sorry I couldn't keep you safe. But I'm still here, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.